Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The Secret Doctrine. The mundane egg. Whence this universal symbol? The egg was incorporated as a sacred sign in the cosmogony of every people on the earth, and was revered both on account of its form and of its inner mystery. From the earliest mental conceptions of man, it has been known as that which represented most successfully the origin and secret of being. The gradual development of the imperceptible germ within the closed shell, the inward working, without any apparent outward interference of force, which from a latent nothing produced an active something, needing naught save heat, and which, having gradually evolved into a concrete living creature, broke its shell. Appearing to the outward senses of all as a self-generated and self-created being, all this must have been a standing miracle from the beginning. The secret teaching explains the reason for this reverence by the symbolism of the prehistoric races. In the beginnings, the first cause had no name. Later it was pictured in the fancy of the thinkers as an ever-invisible, mysterious bird that dropped an egg into chaos, which egg became the universe. Hence Brahma was called Kalahansa, the swan in space and time. Becoming the swan of eternity, Brahma, at the beginning of each Mahamanvantara, lays a golden egg, which typifies the great circle, or circle itself, a symbol for the universe and its spherical bodies. A second reason for the egg having been chosen as the symbolical representation of the universe and of our earth was its form. It was a circle and a sphere, and the oviform shape of our globe must have been known from the beginning of symbology, since it was so universally adopted. The first manifestation of the cosmos in the form of an egg was the most widely diffused belief of antiquity. As Bryant shows, it was a symbol adopted among the Greeks, the Syrians, Persians, and Egyptians. In the Egyptian ritual, Seb, the god of time and of the earth, is spoken of as having laid an egg, or the universe, an egg conceived at the hour of the great one of the dual force. Ra is shown like Brahma gestating in the egg of the universe. The deceased is resplendent in the egg of the land of mysteries. 4. This is the egg to which is given life among the gods. It is the egg of the great clucking hen, the egg of Seb, who issues from it like a hawk. Among the Greeks, the Orphic egg is described by Aristophanes and was part of the Dionysiac and other mysteries, during which the mundane egg was consecrated and its significance explained. Porphyry also shows it to be a representation of the world. Faber and Bryant have tried to show that the egg typified the Ark of Noah, a wild belief, unless the latter is accepted as purely allegorical and symbolical. It can only have typified the ark as a synonym of the moon, the arga which carries the universal seed of life, but had surely nothing to do with the ark of the Bible. Anyhow, the belief that the universe existed in the beginning in the shape of an egg was general. And as Wilson says, a similar account of the first aggregation of the elements in the form of an egg is given in all the Puranas, with the usual epithet Haima or Hiranya. Hiranya, however, means resplendent, shining rather than golden, as is proven by the great Indian scholar, the late Swami Dayanand Sarasvati, in his unpublished polemics with Professor Max Muller. As said in the Vishnu Purana, intellect Mahat, the unmanifested gross elements inclusive, formed an egg, and the Lord of the universe himself abided in it, in the character of Brahma. In that egg, O Brahmana, were the continents and seas and mountains, the planets and divisions of the planets, the gods, the demons and mankind. Both in Greece and in India, the first visible male being, who united in himself the nature of either sex, abode in the egg and issued from it. This firstborn of the world was Dionysus, with some Greeks, the god who sprang from the mundane egg, and from whom the mortals and immortals were derived. The god Ra is shown, in the Book of the Dead, beaming in his egg the sun, and the stars off as soon as the god Shu, the solar energy, awakens and gives him the impulse. He is in the solar egg, the egg to which is given life among the gods. The solar god exclaims, "I am the creative soul of the celestial abyss. None sees my nest, none can break my egg, I am the Lord." In view of the circular form, the vertical bar issuing from the circle or the egg, or the male from the female in the androgyne, it is strange to find a scholar saying, on the ground that the most ancient Indian MSS show no trace of it, that the ancient Aryans were ignorant of the decimal notation. The 10, being the sacred number of the universe, was secret and esoteric, both as regards the unit and cipher, or zero, the circle. Moreover, Professor Max Muller tells that the two words cipher and zero, which are but one, are sufficient to prove that our figures are borrowed from the Arabs. Cipher is the Arabic cifran, and means empty, a translation of the Sanskrit sinyan, or naught, says the professor. The Arabs had their figures from Hindustan, and never claimed the discovery for themselves. As to the Pythagoreans, we need but turn to the ancient manuscripts of Boethius's treatise, De Arithmetica, composed in the 6th century, to find among the Pythagorean numerals the 1 and the 0 as the first and final figures. And Porphyry, who quotes from the Pythagorean Moderatus, says that the numerals of Pythagoras were hieroglyphical symbols, by means whereof he explained ideas concerning the nature of things or the origin of the universe. Now, if, on the one hand, the most ancient Indian MSS show as yet no trace of decimal notation in them, and Max Muller states very clearly that until now he has found but 9 letters, the initials of the Sanskrit numerals. On the other hand, we have records as ancient to supply the wanted proof. We speak of the sculptures and the sacred imagery in the most ancient temples of the Far East. Pythagoras derived his knowledge from India, and we find Professor Max Muller corroborating this statement, at least so far as to allow that the Neo-Pythagoreans were the first teachers of ciphering among the Greeks and Romans, that they at Alexandria, or in Syria, became acquainted with the Indian figures and adapted them to the Pythagorean abacus. This cautious admission implies that Pythagoras himself was acquainted with only 9 figures. Thus we might reasonably answer that, although we possess no certain proof, exoterically, that the decimal notation was known to Pythagoras, who lived at the very close of the Archaic Ages, yet we have sufficient evidence to show that the full numbers, as given by Boethius, were known to the Pythagoreans, even before Alexandria was built. This evidence we find in Aristotle, who says that some philosophers hold that ideas and numbers are of the same nature and amount to 10 in all. This, we believe, will be sufficient to show that the decimal notation was known among them at least as early as 4 centuries BC. For Aristotle does not seem to treat the question as an innovation of the Neo-Pythagoreans. But we know more than this. We know that the decimal system must have been used by the mankind of the earliest Archaic Ages, since the whole astronomical and geometrical portion of the secret sacerdotal language was built upon the number 10, or the combination of the male and female principles, And since the pyramid of Cheops, so-called, is built upon measures of this decimal notation, or rather upon the digits and their combinations with the naught. Of this, however, sufficient has been said in Isis Unveiled, and it is useless to repeat it. The symbolism of the lunar and solar deities is so inextricably mixed up that it is next to impossible to separate from each other such glyphs as the egg, the lotus, and the sacred animals. The ibis, for instance, was held in the greatest veneration in Egypt. It was sacred to Isis, who is often represented with the head of that bird, and also sacred to Mercury or Thoth, who is said to have assumed its form while escaping from Typhon. There were two kinds of ibises in Egypt, Herodotus tells us, one quite black, the other black and white. The former is credited with fighting and exterminating the winged serpents which came every spring from Arabia and infested the country. The other was sacred to the moon, because the latter planet is white and brilliant on her external side, dark and black on that side which she never turns to the earth. Moreover, the ibis kills land serpents and makes the most terrible havoc amongst the eggs of the crocodile, and thus saves Egypt from having the Nile over-infested by those horrible saurians. The bird is credited with doing this in the moonlight, and thus being helped by Isis, whose sidereal symbol is the moon. But the more correct esoteric truth underlying these popular myths is that Hermes, as shown by Abenephius, watched over the Egyptians under the form of that bird and taught them the occult arts and sciences. This simply means that the ibis religiosa had, and has, magical properties in common with many other birds, the albatross preeminently, and the mythical white swan, the swan of eternity or time, the Kalahansa. Were it otherwise, indeed, why should all the ancient peoples, who were no more fools than we are, have had such a superstitious dread of killing certain birds? In Egypt, he who killed an ibis, or the golden hawk, the symbol of the sun and Osiris, risked death, and could hardly escape it. The veneration of some nations for birds was such that Zoroaster, in his precepts, forbids their slaughter as a heinous crime. In our age, we laugh at every kind of divination. Yet why should so many generations have believed in divination by birds, and even in omancy, which is said by Suidas to have been imparted by Orpheus, who taught how, under certain conditions, to perceive in the yolk and white of an egg that which the bird born from it would have seen around it during its short life. This occult art, which, 3,000 years ago, demanded the greatest learning and the most abstruse mathematical calculations, has now fallen into the depths of degradation, and today it is the old cooks and fortune tellers who read the future for servant girls in search of husbands from the white of an egg in a glass. Nevertheless, even Christians have to this day their sacred birds, for instance, the dove, the symbol of the Holy Ghost. Nor have they neglected the sacred animals and the evangelical zulatry, with its bull, eagle, dian, and angel. In reality, the cherub, or seraph, the fiery winged serpent, is as much pagan as that of the Egyptians or the Chaldeans. These four animals are, in reality, the symbols of the four elements and of the four lower principles in man. Nevertheless, they correspond physically and materially to the four constellations that form, so to speak, the sweeter cordage of the solar god, and which, during the winter solstice, occupy the four cardinal points of the zodiacal circle. These four animals may be seen in many of the Roman Catholic New Testaments, in which the portraits of the evangelists are given. They are the animals of Ezekiel's Merkabah. As truly stated by Reagan, The ancient hierophants have combined so cleverly the dogmas and symbols of their religious philosophies that these symbols can be fully explained only by the combination and knowledge of all the keys. They can be only approximately interpreted, even if one discovers 3 out of these 7 systems, viz. the anthropological, the psychic and the astronomical. The 2 chief interpretations, the highest and the lowest, the spiritual and the physiological, were preserved in the greatest secrecy until the latter fell into the dominion of the profane. Thus far, with regard only to the prehistoric hierophants, with whom that which has now become purely or impurely phallic was a science as profound and as mysterious as biology and physiology are now. This was their exclusive property, the fruit of their studies and discoveries. The other 2 were those which dealt with the creative gods, or theogony, and with creative man, that is to say, with the ideal and the practical mysteries. These interpretations were so cleverly veiled and combined that many were those who, while arriving at the discovery of one meaning, were baffled in understanding the significance of the others and could never unriddle them sufficiently to commit dangerous indiscretions. The highest, the first and the fourth theogony in relation to anthropogony were almost impossible to fathom. We find the proofs of this in the Jewish Holy Writ. It is owing to the serpent being oviparous that it became a symbol of wisdom and an emblem of the logoi, or the self-born. In the Temple of Philae, in Upper Egypt, an egg was artificially prepared of clay mixed with various incenses. This was hatched by a peculiar process, and a cerastes or horned viper was produced. The same was done in the Indian temples, in antiquity, in the case of the cobra. The creative god emerges from the egg that issues from the mouth of Neph, as a winged serpent, for the serpent is the symbol of the all-wisdom. With the Hebrews the same deity is glyphed by the flying or fiery serpents of Moses in the wilderness, and with the Alexandrian mystic, she becomes the Orpheo Christos, the logos of the Gnostics. The Protestants try to show that the allegory of the brazen serpent and of the fiery serpents has a direct reference to the mystery of the Christ and the crucifixion, whereas, in truth, it has a far nearer relation to the mystery of generation, when dissociated from the egg with the central germ, or the circle with its central point. Protestant theologians would have us believe their interpretation only because the brazen serpent was lifted on a pole, whereas it had rather a reference to the Egyptian egg standing upright supported by the sacred Tau, since the egg and the serpent are inseparable in the old worship and symbology of Egypt, and since both the brazen and fiery serpents were seraphs, the burning fiery messengers, or the serpent gods, the Nagas of India. Without the egg it was a purely phallic symbol, but when associated therewith, it related to cosmic creation. The brazen serpent had no such holy meaning as the Protestants would ascribe to it, nor was it, in fact, glorified above the fiery serpents, for the bite of which it was only a natural remedy, the symbological meaning of the word brazen being the feminine principle, and that of fiery or gold the masculine principle. Brass was a metal symbolizing the nether world, that of the womb where life should be given. The word for serpent in Hebrew was nachash, but this is also the term for brass. It is said in Numbers that the Jews complained of the wilderness where there was no water, after which the Lord sent fiery serpents to bite them, and then, to oblige Moses, he gave him as a remedy the brazen serpent on a pole for them to look at, after which any man when he beheld the serpent of brass lived. After that the Lord, gathering the people together at the well of Beer, gave them water, and grateful Israel sang this song, "Spring up, O well." When, after studying symbology, the Christian reader comes to understand the innermost meaning of these three symbols, water, brazen, and serpent, and a few more, in the sense given to them in the Holy Bible, he will hardly like to connect the sacred name of his Savior with the brazen serpent incident. The seraphim or fiery winged serpents are no doubt connected with, and inseparable from, the idea of the serpent of eternity God as explained in Keneally's Apocalypse. But the word cherub also meant serpent, in one sense, though its direct meaning is different. For the cherubim and the Persian winged griffins, the guardians of the Golden Mountain, are the same, and the compound name of the former shows their character, as it is formed of kr, a circle, and ab, a serpent, and therefore means a serpent in a circle. And this settles the phallic character of the brazen serpent, and justifies Hezekiah for breaking it. Verbum satis sapienti. In the Book of the Dead, as just shown, reference is often made to the egg. Ra, the Mighty One, remains in his egg during the struggle between the children of the rebellion and Shu, the solar energy, and the dragon of darkness. The deceased is resplendent in his egg when he crosses to the land of mystery. He is the egg of Seb. The egg was the symbol of life and immortality and eternity, and also the glyph of the generative matrix, whereas the Tau, which was associated with it, was only the symbol of life and birth and generation. The mundane egg was placed in Kum, the water of space, or the feminine abstract principle, Kum becoming, with the fall of mankind into generation and phallicism, Ammon the creative god. When Ta, the fiery god, carries the mundane egg in his hand, then the symbolism becomes quite terrestrial and concrete in its significance. In conjunction with the hawk, the symbol of Osiris' son, the symbol is dual, and relates to both lives, the mortal and the immortal. The engraving of a papyrus in Kircher's Oedipus Aegyptiacus shows an egg floating above the mummy. This is the symbol of hope and the promise of a second birth for the Assyrified dead. His soul, after due purification in the Amenti, will gestate in this egg of immortality, to be reborn therefrom into a new life on earth. For this egg, in the esoteric doctrine, is Devachan, the abode of bliss, the winged scarabaeus also being another symbol of it. The winged globe is but another form of the egg, and has the same significance as the scarabaeus, the kaparu from the root kapru, to become, to be reborn, which relates to the rebirth of man, as well as to his spiritual regeneration. In the Theogony of Machus, we find either first, and then air, the two principles from which Ulam, the intelligible deity, the visible universe of matter, is born, out of the mundane egg. In the Orphic hymns, Eros Phanes evolves from the divine egg, which the ethereal winds impregnate, wind being the spirit of God, or rather the spirit of the unknown darkness, the divine idea of Plato, which is said to move in ether. In the Hindu Kathopanishad, Purusha, the divine spirit, already stands before the original matter, from whose union springs the great soul of the world, Maha-Atma, Brahma, the spirit of life, the latter appellations being all identical with Anima Mundi, or the universal soul, the astral light of the Kabbalist and the occultist, or the egg of darkness. Besides this, there are many charming allegories on this subject, scattered through the sacred books of the Brahmins. In one place, it is the female creator who is first a germ, then a drop of heavenly dew, a pearl, and then an egg. In such cases, of which there are too many to enumerate separately, The egg gives birth to the 4 elements within the 5th, ether, and is covered with 7 coverings, which become later on the 7 upper and the 7 lower worlds. Breaking in two, the shell becomes the heaven, and the contents the earth, the white forming the terrestrial waters. Then, again, it is Vishnu who emerges from within the egg, with a lotus in his hand. Vinata, a daughter of Daksha and wife of Kashyapa, the self-born, sprung from time, one of the 7 creators of our world, brought forth an egg from which was born Garuda, the vehicle of Vishnu, the latter allegory having a relation to our earth, as Garuda is the great cycle. The egg was sacred to Isis, and therefore the priests of Egypt never ate eggs. Isis is almost always represented holding a lotus in one hand, and in the other a circle and a cross, crux ansata. Diodorus Siculus states that Osiris was born from an egg, like Brahma. From Leda's egg, Apollo and Latona were born, and also Castor and Pollux, the bright Gemini. And though the Buddhists do not attribute the same origin to their founder, yet, no more than the ancient Egyptians or the modern Brahmins, do they eat eggs, lest they should destroy the germ of life latent in them, and thereby commit sin. The Chinese believed that their first man was born from an egg, which Tian dropped down from heaven to earth into the waters. This egg symbol is still regarded by some as representing the idea of the origin of life, which is a scientific truth, though the human ovum is invisible to the naked eye. Therefore we see respect shown to it from the remotest antiquity, by the Greeks, Phoenicians, Romans, the Japanese, and the Siamese, the North and South American tribes, and even the savages of the remotest islands. With the Egyptians, the concealed god was Amun or Mon, the hidden, the supreme spirit. All their gods were dual, the scientific reality for the sanctuary, its double, the fabulous and mythical entity, for the masses. For instance, as observed in the section Chaos, Theos, Cosmos, the elder Horus was the idea of the world remaining in the demiurgic mind, born in darkness before the creation of the world. The second Horus was the same idea going forth from the Logos, becoming clothed with matter, and assuming an actual existence. Horus, the elder or Herwari, is an ancient aspect of the solar god, contemporary with Ra and Shu. Herwari is often mistaken for Horsusi, son of Osiris and Isis. The Egyptians very often represented the rising sun under the form of Hor, the elder, rising from a full-blown lotus, the universe, when the solar disk is always found on the hawk head of that god. Herwari is Khnum. The same with Khnum and Amun, both are represented as ram-headed, and both are often confused, though their functions are different. Khnum is the modeler of men, fashioning men and things out of the mundane egg, on a potter's wheel. Amun-Ra, the generator, is the secondary aspect of the concealed deity. Khnum was adored at Elephanto and Philly, Amun at Thebes. But it is Emuft, the one, supreme planetary principle, who blows the egg out of his mouth, and who is, therefore, Brahma. The shadow of the deity, cosmic and universal, of that which broods over and permeates the egg with its vivifying spirit, until the germ contained in it is ripe, was the mystery god whose name was unpronounceable. It is Ptah, however, he who opens the opener of life and death, who proceeds from the egg of the world to begin his dual work. According to the Greeks, the phantom form of the chemis, chemi, ancient Egypt, which floats on the ethereal waves of the Emperor sphere, was called into being by Horus Apollo, the sun god, who caused it to evolve out of the mundane egg. The Brahmanda Purana contains fully the mystery about Brahma's golden egg, and this is why, perhaps, it is inaccessible to the Orientalists, who say that this Purana, like the Skanda, is no longer procurable in a collective body, but is represented by a variety of khandas and mahatmyas, professing to be derived from it. The Brahmanda Purana is described as that which is declared in 12,200 verses, the magnificence of the egg of Brahma, and in which an account of the future kalpas is contained, as revealed by Brahma. Quite so, and much more, perchance. In the Scandinavian cosmogony, placed by Professor Max Muller, in point of time, as far anterior to the Vedas in the poem of Waluspa, the Song of the Prophetess, the mundane egg is again discovered in the phantom germ of the universe, which is represented as lying in the Janangagap, the cup of illusion, Maya, the boundless and void abyss. In this world's matrix, formerly a region of night and desolation, Nephelheim, the mist place, the nebular, as it is called now, in the astral light, dropped a ray of cold light which overflowed this cup and froze in it. Then the invisible blew a scorching wind which dissolved the frozen waters and cleared the mist. These waters, chaos, called the streams of Eloager, distilling in vivifying drops, fell down and created the earth and the giant Emer, who had only the semblance of man, the heavenly man, and the cow, Audumla, the mother astral light or cosmic soul, from whose udder flowed 4 streams of milk, the 4 cardinal points, the 4 heads of the 4 rivers of Eden, etc. Which 4 are symbolized by the cube and all its various and mystical meanings. The Christians, especially the Greek and Latin churches, have fully adopted the symbol and see in it a commemoration of life eternal, of salvation and of resurrection. This is found in, and corroborated by, the time-honored custom of exchanging Easter eggs. From the Anguinum, the egg of the pagan druid, whose name alone made Rome tremble with fear, to the red Easter egg of the Slavonian peasant, a cycle has passed. And yet, whether in civilized Europe, or among the abject savages of Central America, we find the same archaic primitive thought, if we will only search for it, and do not in the haughtiness of our fancied mental and physical superiority disfigure the original idea of the symbol. The days and nights of Brahma. This is the name given to the periods called Manvantara, Manvantara, or between the Manus and Pralaya, or dissolution, one referring to the active periods of the universe, the other to its times of relative and complete rest, whether they occur at the end of a day or an age, or life, of Brahma. These periods, which follow each other in regular succession, are also called small and great kalpas, the minor and the mahakalpas, though, properly speaking, the mahakalpa is never a day, but a whole life or age of Brahma, for it is said in the Brahma Vivarta. Chronologers compute a kalpa by the life of Brahma. Minor kalpas, as Samvarta and the rest, are numerous. In sober truth they are infinite, for they have never had a commencement, or, in other words, there never was a first kalpa, nor will there ever be a last, in eternity. 1 pararta, or half of the existence of Brahma, in the ordinary acceptation of this measure of time, has already expired in the present Mahakalpa. The last Kalpa was the Padma, or that of the golden lotus. The present one is the Varaha, the boar incarnation, or Avatara. One thing is to be especially noted by the scholar who studies the Hindu religion from the Puranas. He must never take the statements found therein literally, and in one sense only, and those especially, which concern the Manvantaras or Kalpas, have to be understood in their several references. Thus these ages relate, in the same language, to both the great and the small periods, to Mahakalpas and to minor cycles. The Matsya, or fish avatara, happened before the Varaha or boar avatara. The allegories, therefore, must relate to both the Padma and the present Manvantara, and also to the minor cycles which have occurred since the reappearance of our chain of worlds and the earth. And as the Matsya avatara of Vishnu and Vivasvata's deluge are correctly connected with an event that happened on our earth during this round, it is evident that, while it may relate to pre-cosmic events, pre-cosmic in the sense of our cosmos, or solar system, it has reference, in our case, to a distant geological period. Not even esoteric philosophy can claim to know, except by analogical inference, that which took place before the reappearance of our solar system and previous to the last Mahapralaya. But it teaches distinctly that after the first geological disturbance of the Earth's axis, which ended in the sweeping down to the bottom of the seas of the whole second continent, with its primeval races of which successive continents, Earths, Atlantis was the fourth. There came another disturbance owing to the axis again resuming its previous degree of inclination as rapidly as it had changed it. When the earth was indeed once more raised out of the waters as above, so below, and vice versa. There were gods on earth in those days, gods, and not men, as we know them now, says the tradition. As will be shown in Volume 2, the computation of periods, in exoteric Hinduism, refers to both the great cosmic and the small terrestrial events and cataclysms, and the same may be demonstrated in respect to names. For instance, the name Yudhishthira, the first king of the Sakya or Shakas, who opens the Kali Yuga era, which has to last 432,000 years, an actual king who lived 3,102 years BC. Applies also to the Great Deluge, at the time of the first sinking of Atlantis. He is the Yudhishthira. We may yet hope, before the end of this century, to see the Mahabharatan epic proclaimed identical with the wars of the great Napoleon. Born on the mountain of the 100 peaks, at the extremity of the world, beyond which nobody can go, and immediately after the flood. We know of no flood 3,102 years BC. Not even that of Noah, for, agreeably with Judeo-Christian chronology, it took place 2,349 years BC. This relates to an esoteric division of time and a mystery explained elsewhere, and may therefore be left aside for the present. Suffice it to remark, at this juncture, that all the efforts of imagination of the Wilfords, Bentleys, and other would-be Oedipuses of esoteric Hindu chronology have sadly failed. No computation of either the Four Ages or the Manvantaras has ever yet been unriddled by our very learned Orientalists, who have therefore cut the Gordian knot by proclaiming the whole a figment of the Brahmanical brain. So be it, and may the great scholars rest in peace. Let us see, however, what were the three kinds of pralayas, and what is the popular belief about them. For once it agrees with esotericism. Of the pralaya, before which 14 manvantaras elapse, having over them as many presiding manas, and at whose close occurs the incidental or Brahma's dissolution, it is said in Vishnu Purana, in condensed paraphrase. At the end of 1,000 periods of 4 ages, which complete a day of Brahma, the earth is almost exhausted. The eternal, Avyaya, Vishnu then assumes the character of Rudra, the destroyer, Shiva, and reunites all his creatures to himself. He enters the 7 rays of the sun and drinks up all the waters of the globe. He causes the moisture to evaporate, thus drying up the whole earth. Oceans and rivers, torrents and small streams, are all exhaled. Thus fed with abundant moisture, the 7 solar rays become 7 suns by dilation, and they finally set the world on fire. Hari, the destroyer of all things, who is the flame of time, Kalagni, finally consumes the earth. Then Rudra, becoming Janardana, breathes clouds and rain. There are many kinds of pralaya, but 3 chief periods are specially mentioned in old Hindu books. The first of these, as Wilson shows, is called Nimitika, occasional or incidental, caused by the intervals of Brahma's days. It is the destruction of creatures, of all that lives and has a form, but not of the substance, which remains in statu quo till the new dawn after that night. The second is called Prakritika, and occurs at the end of the age or life of Brahma, when everything that exists is resolved into the primal element, to be remodeled at the end of that longer night. The third, Ajantika, does not concern the worlds or the universe, but only the individualities of some people. It is thus the individual pralaya, or nirvana, after having reached which there is no more future existence possible, no rebirth till after the Mahapralaya. The latter night lasting as it does 311,040,000,000,000 years, with the possibility also of being almost doubled in the case of the lucky Jivanmukta who reaches nirvana at an early period of a manvantara, is long enough to be regarded as eternal, if not endless. The Bhagavata Purana speaks of a fourth kind of pralaya, the nitya or constant dissolution, and explains it as the change which takes place imperceptibly in everything in this universe from the globe down to the atom, without cessation. It is growth and decay, life and death. When the Mahapralaya arrives, the inhabitants of Svarloka, the upper sphere, disturbed by the conflagration, seek refuge with the Pitras, their progenitors, the Manas, the 7 Rishis, the various orders of celestial spirits and the gods, in Maharloka. When the latter is reached also, the whole of the above enumerated beings migrate in their turn from Maharloka and repair to Janaloka, in their subtle forms, destined to become re-embodied in similar capacities as their former, when the world is renewed at the beginning of the succeeding kalpa. Clouds, mighty in size and loud in thunder, fill up all space Nabhastala. Showering down torrents of water, these clouds quench the dreadful fires, and then they rain uninterruptedly for 100 divine years, and deluge the whole world solar system. Pouring down, in drops as large as dice, these rains overspread the earth, and fill the middle region, Bhuvoloka, and inundate heaven. The world is now enveloped in darkness, and all things, animate or inanimate, having perished. The clouds continue to pour down their waters, and the night of Brahma reigns supreme over the scene of desolation. This is what we call in the esoteric doctrine a solar pralaya. When the waters have reached the region of the 7 rishis, and the world, our solar system, is one ocean, they stop. The breath of Vishnu becomes a strong wind, which blows for another 100 divine years, until all clouds are dispersed. The wind is then reabsorbed. And that of which all things are made, the Lord by whom all things exist, he who is inconceivable, without beginning, the beginning of the universe, reposes, sleeping upon Shesha the serpent of infinity in the midst of the deep. The creator Adikrit Hari sleeps upon the ocean of space, in the form of Brahma glorified by Sanaka and the saints, Siddhas, of Janaloka, and contemplated by the holy denizens of Brahmaloka, anxious for final liberation involved in mystic slumber. the celestial personification of his own illusions. This is the dissolution Pratisanchara termed incidental because Hari is its incidental ideal cause. When the universal spirit wakes, the world revives. When he closes his eyes, all things fall upon the bed of mystic slumber. In like manner, as 1,000 great ages constitute a day of Brahma in the original it is Padmayoni, the same as Abjayoni, lotus-born not Brahma, so his night consists of the same period. Awaking at the end of his night, the unborn creates the universe anew. This is incidental pralaya. What is the elemental, prakritika, dissolution? Parashara describes it to Maitreya as follows. When, by dearth and fire all the worlds and Patala's hells are withered up the progress of elemental dissolution is begun. Then, first, the waters swallow up the property of earth, which is the rudiment of smell, and earth deprived of this property proceeds to destruction, and becomes one with water. When the universe is, thus, pervaded by the waves of the watery element, its rudimentary flavor is licked up by the element of fire, and the waters themselves are destroyed and become one with fire, and the universe is, therefore, entirely filled with ethereal flame, which gradually overspreads the whole world. While space is one flame, the element of wind seizes upon the rudimental property, or form, which is the cause of light, and that being withdrawn, pralina, all becomes of the nature of air. The rudiment of form being destroyed, and fire vibhavasu deprived of its rudiment, air extinguishes fire and spreads over space, which is deprived of light, when fire merges into air. Air, then, accompanied by sound, which is the source of ether, extends everywhere throughout the 10 regions until ether seizes upon contact, its rudimental property, by the loss of which, air is destroyed, and ether remains unmodified, devoid of form, flavor, touch, sparsha, and smell. It exists unembodied murtimat and vast, and pervades the whole of space. Ether akasha, whose characteristic property and rudiment is sound, the word exists alone, occupying all the vacuity of space, or rather, occupying the whole containment of space. Then the origin of the elements devours sound, the collective demiurgos, and the hosts of Dayan Chohans, and all the existing elements are, at once, merged into their original. This primary element is consciousness, combined with the property of darkness tamasa, spiritual darkness rather, and is, itself, swallowed up, disintegrated by Mahat, the universal intellect, whose characteristic property is intelligence buddhi, and earth and Mahat are the inner and outer boundaries of the universe. In this manner, as in the beginning were the 7 forms of nature prakriti reckoned from Mahat to earth, so these 7 successively re-enter into each other. The egg of Brahma, Sarvamandala, is dissolved in the waters that surround it, with its 7 zones, vipas, 7 oceans, 7 regions, and their mountains. The investure of water is drunk by fire, the stratum of fire is absorbed by that of air, air blends itself with ether akasha, the primary element bhutati, the origin, or rather the cause, of the primary element devours the ether, and is, itself, destroyed by intellect Mahat, the great, the universal mind, which, along with all these, is seized upon by nature prakriti and disappears. This prakriti is, essentially, the same, whether discrete or indiscrete, only that which is discrete is, finally, lost or absorbed in the indiscrete. Spirit pums also, which is one, pure, imperishable, eternal, all-pervading, is a portion of that supreme spirit which is all things. That spirit Sarvesha which is other than embodied spirit and in which there are no attributes of name, species naman and jati, or rupa, hence body rather than species, or the like remains as the soul, existence satta. Nature Prakriti and spirit Purusha both resolve finally into Supreme Spirit. This is the final pralaya, the death of cosmos, after which its spirit rests in nirvana, or in that for which there is neither day nor night. All the other pralayas are periodical and follow the manvantaras in regular succession, as the night follows the day of every human creature, animal, and plant. The cycle of creation of the lives of cosmos is run down, the energy of the manifested word having its growth, culmination, and decrease, as have all things temporary, however long their duration. The creative force is eternal as noumenal, as a phenomenal manifestation, in its aspects, it has a beginning and must, therefore, have an end. During that interval, it has its periods of activity and its periods of rest. And these are the days and nights of Brahma. But Brahman, the noumenon, never rests, as it never changes, but ever is, though it cannot be said to be anywhere. The Jewish Kabbalists felt the necessity of this immutability in an eternal, infinite deity, and therefore applied the same thought to the anthropomorphic God. The idea is poetical and very appropriate in its application. In the Zohar we read as follows. As Moses was keeping a vigil on Mount Sinai, in company with the deity, who was concealed from his sight by a cloud, he felt a great fear overcome him, and suddenly asked, Lord, where art thou? Sleepest thou, O Lord? And the Spirit answered him, I never sleep. Were I to fall asleep for a moment before my time, all the creation would crumble into dissolution in one instant. Before my time is very suggestive. It shows the God of Moses to be only a temporary substitute, like Brahma, the male, a substitute and an aspect of that which is immutable, and which, therefore, can take no part in the days or nights, nor have any concern whatever with reaction or dissolution. While the Eastern occultists have 7 modes of interpretation, the Jews have only 4, namely, the real mystical, the allegorical, the moral, and the literal or pashut. The latter is the key of the exoteric churches and not worth discussion. Here are several sentences which, read in the first or mystical key, show the identity of the foundations of construction in every scripture. They are given in Isaac Meyer's excellent book on the Kabbalistic works, which he seems to have well studied. I quote verbatim. Brasheth bara Elohim ath Hashamayim vath Haaretz, i.e., in the beginning the gods created the heavens and the earth, the meaning of which is the 6 Sephrith of construction, over which Brasheth stands, all belong below. It created 6, and, on these stand, exist, all things. And those depend upon the 7 forms of the cranium up to the dignity of all dignities. And the second earth does not come into calculation, therefore it has been said. And from it, that earth, which underwent the curse, came it forth. It, the earth, was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the abyss, and the spirit of Elohim was breathing over the waters. 13 depend on 13 forms of the most worthy dignity. 6,000 years hang are referred to in the first 6 words. The 7th thousand, the millennium, above it, the cursed earth, is that which is strong by itself. And it was rendered entirely desolate during 12 hours, one day. In the 13th, it, the deity, shall restore them. And everything shall be renewed as before, and all those 6 shall continue. The Sephiroth of construction are the 6 Dayan Chohans, Manus, Prajapatis, synthesized by the 7th Brashith, the first emanation, Logos, and who are called, therefore, the builders of the lower physical universe, all belonging below. These 6-6-pointed star with middle dot, whose essences of the 7th, are the Upadhi, the baser fundamental stone, on which the objective universe is built, the noumenoi of all things. Hence they are, at the same time, the forces of nature, the 7 angels of the presence, the 6th and 7th principles in man, the spirito-psychophysical spheres of the septenary chain, the root traces, etc. They all depend upon the 7 forms of the cranium up to the highest. The second earth does not come into calculation because it is no earth, but the chaos, or abyss of space, in which rested the paradigmatic, or model universe, in the ideation of the Oversoul, brooding over it. The term curse is here very misleading, for it means simply doom or destiny, or that fatality which sent it forth into the objective state. This is shown by that earth under the curse being described as without form and void, in whose abysmal depths the breath of the Elohim, or collective logoi, produced, or so to say photographed, the first divine ideation of the things to be. This process is repeated after every pralaya before the beginnings of a new manvantara, or period of sentient individual being. 13 depend on 13 forms refers to the 13 periods, personified by the 13 Manus, with Svayambhuva, the 14th 13, instead of 14, being an additional veil those 14 Manus who reign within the term of a Mahayuga, a day of Brahma. These 13-14 of the objective universe depend on the 13-14 paradigmatic ideal forms. The meaning of the 6,000 years which hang in the first 6 words has again to be sought in the Indian wisdom. They refer to the primordial 6-7 kings of Edom who typify the worlds, or spheres, of our chain during the first round, as well as the primordial men of this round. They are the septenary pre-Adamic first root trace, or they who existed before the third, separated race. As they were shadows and senseless, for they had not yet eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they could not see the Parziphum, or face could not see face, that is to say, primeval men were unconscious. Therefore, the primordial 7 kings Daidai were destroyed. Now, who are these kings? They are the kings who are the 7 rishis, certain, secondary, divinities, Indra Chakra, Manu, and the kings his sons who are created dan perish at one period as Vishnu Purana tells us. For the 7,000 which is not the millennium of exoteric Christianity, but that of anthropogenesis, represents both the 7th period of creation that of physical man, according to Vishnu Purana, and the 7th principle, both macrocosmic and microcosmic, and also the pralaya after the 7th period, the night, which is the same duration as the day, of Brahma. It was rendered entirely desolate during 12 hours. It is in the 13th, twice 6 in the synthesis, that everything shall be restored, and the 6 shall continue. Thus, the author of the Kabbalah remarks quite truly that long before his Ibn Jibral's time, many centuries before the Christian era, there was in Central Asia a wisdom religion, fragments of which subsequently existed among the learned men of the archaic Egyptians, the ancient Chinese, Hindus. And that the Kabbalah most likely originally came from Aryan sources, through Central Asia, Persia, India and Mesopotamia, for from Ur and Haran came Abraham and many others, into Palestine. Such was also the firm conviction of C.W. King, the author of the Gnostics and Their Remains. Vamadeva Medelier describes the coming night most poetically. Though it is given in Isis unveiled, it is worthy of repetition. Strange noises are heard, proceeding from every point. These are the precursors of the night of Brahma. Dusk rises at the horizon, and the sun passes away behind the 13th degree of Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac, and will reach no more the sign of the Meena, the zodiacal sign Pisces, or the fish. The gurus of the pagodas, appointed to watch the Rashishakram zodiac, may now break their circle and instruments, for they are henceforth useless. Gradually light pales, heat diminishes, uninhabited spots multiply on the earth, the air becomes more and more rarefied, the springs of waters dry up, the great rivers see their waves exhausted, the ocean shows its sandy bottom, and plants die. Men and animals decrease in size daily. Life and motion lose their force, planets can hardly gravitate in space, they are extinguished one by one, like a lamp which the hand of the chakra servant neglects to replenish. Surya, the sun, flickers and goes out, matter falls into dissolution pralaya, and Brahma merges back into Dios, the unrevealed God, and, his task being accomplished, he falls asleep. Another day is past, night sets in, and continues until the future dawn. And now again re-enter into the golden egg of his thought the germs of all that exist, as the divine Manu tells us. During his peaceful rest, the animated beings, endowed with the principles of action, cease their functions, and all feeling manas becomes dormant. When they are all absorbed in the Supreme Soul, this soul of all the beings sleeps in complete repose, till the day when it resumes its form, and awakes again from its primitive darkness. As the Satya Yuga is always the first in the series of the 4 ages or yugas, so the Kali ever comes the last. The Kali Yuga now reigns supreme in India, and it seems to coincide with that of the Western Age. Anyhow, it is curious to see how prophetic in almost all things was the writer of Vishnu Purana, when foretelling to Maitreya some of the dark influences and sins of this Kali Yuga. For after saying that the barbarians will be masters of the banks of the Indus, of Chandrabhaga and Kashmira, he adds, there will be contemporary monarchs, reigning over the earth, kings of churlish spirit, violent temper, and ever addicted to falsehood and wickedness. They will inflict death on women, children, and cows. They will seize upon the property of their subjects or, according to another reading, be intent upon the wives of others. They will be of limited power, their lives will be short, their desires insatiable. People of various countries intermingling with them will follow their example, and, the barbarians being powerful in India in the patronage of the princes, whilst pure tribes are neglected, the people will perish or, as the commentator has it, the mlechas will be in the center, and the Aryas in the end. Wealth and piety will decrease day by day, until the world will be wholly depraved. Property alone will confer rank, wealth will be the only source of devotion, passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes, falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation, and women will be objects merely of sensual gratification. External types will be the only distinction of the several orders of life. Dishonesty anyaya will be the universal means of subsistence, weakness the cause of dependence, menace and presumption will be substituted for learning, liberality will be devotion, a man if rich will be reputed pure, mutual assent will be marriage, fine clothes will be dignity. He who is the strongest will reign the people, unable to bear the heavy burthens Karabara, load of taxes, will take refuge among the valleys. Thus, in the Kali age, will decay constantly proceed until the human race approaches its annihilation pralaya. When the close of the Kali age shall be nigh, a portion of that divine being which exists, of its own spiritual nature Kalki Avatara, shall descend upon earth, endowed with the 8 superhuman faculties. He will re-establish righteousness upon earth. And the minds of those who live at the end of Kali Yuga shall be awakened, and shall be as pellucid as crystal. The men who are, thus, changed shall be as the seeds of human beings, and shall give birth to a race who shall follow the laws of the Krita age, or age of purity. As it is said, when the sun and moon and the lunar asterism, Tishya, and the planet Jupiter are in one mansion, the Krita or Satya age shall return. 2 persons, Devapi, of the race of Kuru, and Meru Moru, of the family of Ikshvaku, continue alive throughout the 4 ages, residing at Kalapa. They will return hither. In the beginning of the Krita age Meru Moru, the son of Shira, through the power of devotion, yoga, is still living, and will be the restorer of the Kshatriya race of the solar dynasty. Whether right or wrong with regard to the latter prophecy, the blessings of Kali Yuga are well described and fit in admirably, even with that which one sees and hears in Europe and other civilized and Christian lands in the full 19th and at the dawn of the 20th century of our great era of enlightenment. The lotus as a universal symbol. There are no ancient symbols without a deep and philosophical meaning attached to them, their importance and significance increasing with their antiquity. Such is the lotus. It is the flower sacred to nature and her gods, and represents the abstract and the concrete universes, standing as the emblem of the productive powers of both spiritual and physical nature. It was held as sacred from the remotest antiquity by the Aryan Hindus, the Egyptians, and by the Buddhists after them. It was revered in China and Japan, and adopted as a Christian emblem by the Greek and Latin churches, who made of it a messenger, as do now the Christians, who have replaced it with the water lily. In the Christian religion, in every picture of the Annunciation, Gabriel, the archangel, appears to the Virgin Mary, holding in his hand a spray of water lilies. The spray, typifying fire and water, or the idea of creation and generation, symbolizes precisely the same idea as the lotus, in the hand of the Bodhisattva who announces to Mahamaya, Gautama's mother, the birth of Buddha, the world's savior. Thus also, were Osiris and Horus constantly represented by the Egyptians in association with the lotus flower, both being sun gods or gods of fire, just as the Holy Ghost is still typified by tongues of fire in the Acts. It had, and still has, its mystic meaning, which is identical in every nation on earth. We refer the reader to Sir William Jones. With the Hindus, the lotus is the emblem of the productive power of nature, through the agency of fire and water, or spirit and matter. O thou eternal! I see Brahm, the Creator, enthroned in thee above the lotus, says a verse in the Bhagavad Gita. And Sir W. Jones shows, as already noted in the stanzas, that the seeds of the lotus, even before they germinate, contain perfectly formed leaves, the miniature shapes of what they will become one day, as perfected plants. The lotus, in India, is the symbol of prolific earth and, what is more, of Mount Meru. The 4 angels or genii of the 4 quarters of heaven, the Maharajas of the stanzas, stand each on a lotus. The lotus is the twofold type of the divine and human hermaphrodite, being so to say, of dual sex. With the Hindus, the spirit of fire or heat which stirs up, fructifies, and develops into concrete form, from its ideal prototype, everything which is born of water, or primordial earth evolved Brahma. The lotus flower, represented as growing out of Vishnu's navel, the god who rests in the waters of space on the serpent of infinity, is the most graphic symbol ever yet made. It is the universe evolving from the central sun, the point, the ever-concealed germ. Lakshmi, who is the female aspect of Vishnu, and who is also called Padma, the lotus, in the Ramayana, is likewise shown floating on a lotus flower, at the creation, and during the churning of the ocean of space, as also springing from the sea of milk like Venus Aphrodite, from the foam of the ocean. Then, seated on a lotus, beauty's bright goddess, peerless Shri, arose out of the waves, sings an English Orientalist and poet, Sir Monier Williams. The underlying idea in this symbol is very beautiful and, furthermore, shows an identical parentage in all the religious systems. Whether as the lotus or water lily, it signifies one and the same philosophical idea, namely, the emanation of the objective from the subjective, divine ideation passing from the abstract into the concrete or visible form. 4. As soon as darkness, or rather that which is darkness for ignorance, has disappeared in its own realm of eternal light, leaving behind itself only its divine manifested ideation, the creative logoi have their understanding opened, and they see in the ideal world, hitherto concealed in the divine thought, the archetypal forms of all, and proceed to copy and build, or fashion, upon these models, forms evanescent and transcendent. At this stage of action, the demiurge is not yet the architect. Born in the twilight of action, he has yet to first perceive the plan, to realize the ideal forms, which lie buried in the bosom of eternal ideation, just as the future lotus leaves, the immaculate petals, are concealed within the seed of that plant. In esoteric philosophy, the demiurge, or logos, regarded as the creator, is simply an abstract term, an idea, like the word army. As the latter is the all-embracing term for a body of active forces, or working unit soldiers, so is the demiurge the qualitative compound of a multitude of creators or builders. Burnouf, the great Orientalist, seized the idea perfectly when he said that Brahma does not create the earth any more than the rest of the universe. Having evolved himself from the soul of the world, once separated from the first cause, he evaporates with, and emanates, all nature out of himself. He does not stand above it, but is mixed up with it. Brahma and the universe form one being, each particle of which is in its essence Brahma himself, who proceeded out of himself. In the chapter of the Book of the Dead, called Transformation into the Lotus, the god, figured as a head emerging from this flower, exclaims, "I am the pure lotus, emerging from the luminous ones. I carry the messages of Horus. I am the pure lotus which comes from the solar fields." The lotus idea may be traced even in the Elohistic first chapter of Genesis, as stated in Isis Unveiled. It is to this idea that we must look for the origin and explanation of the verse in the Jewish cosmogony which reads, "And God said, Let the earth bring forth the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself." In all the primitive religions, the creative God is the Son of the Father, that is to say, his thought made visible, and before the Christian era, from the Trimurti of the Hindus down to the three Kabbalistic heads of the scriptures, as explained by the Jews, The triune Godhead of each nation was fully defined and substantiated in its allegories. Such is the cosmic and ideal significance of this great symbol with the Eastern peoples. But when applied to practical and exoteric worship, which had also its esoteric symbology, the lotus, in time, became the carrier and container of a more terrestrial idea. No dogmatic religion has ever escaped having the sexual element in it, and to this day it soils the moral beauty of the root idea of symbology. The following is quoted from the same Kabbalistic MS, which we have already cited on several occasions. Pointing to like signification was the lotus growing in the waters of the Nile. Its mode of growth peculiarly fitted it as a symbol of the generative activities. The flower of the lotus, which is the bearer of the seed for reproduction, as the result of its maturing, is connected by its placenta-like attachment to Mother Earth, or the womb of Isis, through the water of the womb, that is, the river Nile, by the long cord-like stalk, the umbilicus. Nothing can be plainer than the symbol, and to make it perfect in its intended signification, a child is sometimes represented as seated in or issuing from the flower. Thus Osiris and Isis, the children of Cronus, or time without end, in the development of their nature forces, in this picture, become the parents of man under the name Horus. We cannot lay too great stress upon the use of this generative function as a basis for a symbolical language and a scientific art speech. Thought upon the ideal leads at once to reflection upon the subject of creative cause. In its workings, nature is observed to have fashioned a wonderful piece of living mechanism, governed by an added living soul, the life, development and history of which soul, as to its whence, its present, and its whither, surpass all efforts of the human intellect. The newborn is an ever-recurring miracle, an evidence that within the workshop of the womb, an intelligent creative power has intervened to fasten a living soul to a physical machine. The amazing wonderfulness of the fact attaches a holy sacredness to all connected with the organs of reproduction, as the dwelling and place of evident constructive intervention of deity. This is a correct rendering of the underlying ideas of old, of the purely pantheistic conceptions, impersonal and reverential, of the archaic philosophers of the prehistoric ages. It is not so, however, when applied to sinful humanity, to the gross ideas attached to personality. Therefore, no pantheistic philosopher would fail to find the remarks that follow the above, and which represent the anthropomorphism of Judean symbology, other than dangerous for the sacredness of true religion, and fitting only for our materialistic age, which is the direct outcome and result of that anthropomorphic character. For this is the keynote to the entire spirit and essence of the Old Testament, as the MS states, treating of the symbolism of the art speech of the Bible. Therefore the locality of the womb is to be taken as the most holy place, the sanctum sanctorum, and the veritable temple of the living God. With man, the possession of the woman has always been considered as an essential part of himself, to make one out of two, and jealously guarded as sacred. Even the part of the ordinary house or home consecrated to the dwelling of the wife was called the penetralia, the secret or sacred, and hence the metaphor of the Holy of Holies, of sacred constructions, taken from the idea of the sacredness of the organs of generation. Carried to the extreme of description by metaphor, this part of the house is described in the sacred books as the between the thighs of the house, and sometimes the idea is carried out constructively in the great door opening of churches placed inward between flanking buttresses. No such thought carried to the extreme ever existed among the old primitive Aryans. This is proven by the fact that, in the Vedic period, their women were not placed apart from men in penetralia, or zananas. This seclusion began when the Mohammedans, the next heirs to Hebrew symbolism, after Christian ecclesiasticism had conquered the land and gradually enforced their ways and customs upon the Hindus. The pre- and post-Vedic woman was as free as man, and no impure terrestrial thought was ever mixed with the religious symbology of the early Aryans. The idea and application are purely Semitic. This is corroborated by the writer of the said intensely learned and Kabbalistic revelation when he closes the above quoted passages by adding, "If to these organs as symbols of creative cosmic agencies, the idea of the origin of measures as well as of time periods can be attached, then indeed, in the constructions of the temples as dwellings of deity, or of Jehovah, that part designated as the Holy of Holies, or the Most Holy Place, should borrow its title from the recognized sacredness of the generative organs, considered as symbols of measures as well as of creative cause. With the ancient wise, there was no name, and no idea, and no symbol of a first cause. Most decidedly not. Rather never give a thought to it and leave it forever nameless, as the early pantheists did, than degrade the sacredness of that ideal of ideals by dragging down its symbols into such anthropomorphic forms." Here again one perceives the immense chasm between Aryan and Semitic religious thought, the two opposite poles, sincerity and concealment. With the Brahmins, who have never invested the natural procreative functions of mankind with an original sin element, it is a religious duty to have a son. A Brahmin, in days of old, having accomplished his mission of human creator, retired to the jungle and passed the rest of his days in religious meditation. He had accomplished his duty to nature as mortal man and its co-worker, and henceforth gave all his thoughts to the spiritual and immortal portion of himself, regarding the terrestrial as a mere illusion, an evanescent dream which, indeed it is. With the Semite, it was different. He invented a temptation of flesh in a Garden of Eden, and showed as God esoterically, the tempter and the ruler of nature cursing, forever an act, which was in the logical program of that nature. All this exoterically, as in the cloak and dead letter of Genesis and the rest. At the same time, esoterically, he regarded the supposed sin and fall as an act so sacred as to choose the organ, the perpetrator of the original sin, as the fittest and most sacred symbol to represent that God, who is shown as branding its entering into function as disobedience and everlasting sin. Who can ever fathom the paradoxical depths of the Semitic mind? And this paradoxical element, minus its innermost significance, has now passed entirely into Christian theology and dogma. Whether the early fathers of the Church knew the esoteric meaning of the Hebrew Testament, or whether only a few of them were aware of it, while the others remained ignorant of the secret, is for posterity to decide. One thing, at any rate, is certain. As the esotericism of the New Testament agrees perfectly with that of the Hebrew Mosaic books, and since, at the same time, a number of purely Egyptian symbols and pagan dogmas in general, the Trinity, for example, have been copied by and incorporated into the Synoptics and St. John, it becomes evident that the identity of those symbols was known to the writers of the New Testament, whoever they may have been. They must have been also aware of the priority of the Egyptian esotericism, since they have adopted several symbols which typify purely Egyptian conceptions and beliefs in their outward and inward meaning, and which are not to be found in the Jewish canon. One of these is the water lily in the hands of the archangel, in the early representations of his appearance to the Virgin Mary, and these symbolical images are preserved to this day in the iconography of the Greek and Roman churches. Thus water, fire and the cross, as well as the dove, the lamb and other sacred animals, with all their combinations, esoterically yield an identical meaning, and must have been accepted as an improvement upon Judaism pure and simple. For the lotus and water are among the oldest symbols, and in their origin are purely Aryan, though they became common property during the branching off of the fifth race. To give an example, letters, as well as numbers, were all mystic, whether in combination or taken separately. The most sacred of all is the letter M. It is both feminine and masculine, or androgyne, and is made to symbolize water in its origin, the great deep. It is a mystic letter in all languages, Eastern and Western, and stands as a glyph for the waves, thus three triangles. In the Aryan esotericism, as in the Semitic, this letter has always stood for the waters. In Sanskrit, for instance, Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac, means a crocodile, or rather an aquatic monster associated always with water. The letter Ma is equivalent to, and corresponds with, the number 5, which is composed of a binary, the symbol of the two sexes separated, and of the ternary, the symbol of the third life, the progeny of the binary. This, again, is often symbolized by a pentagon, the latter being a sacred sign, a divine monogram. Maitreya is the secret name of the fifth Buddha, and the Kalki Avatara of the Brahmins, the last Messiah who will come at the culmination of the great cycle. It is also the initial letter of the Greek metis, or divine wisdom, of Mimra, the word, or logos, and of Mithras, the mir, the monad mystery. All these are born in, and from, the great deep, and are the sons of Maya, the mother, in Egypt, Mut, in Greece, Minerva, divine wisdom, of Mary, or Miriam, Murat, etc., the mother of the Christian Logos, and of Maya, the mother of Buddha. Madhava and Madhavi are the titles of the most important gods and goddesses of the Hindu pantheon. Finally, mandala is, in Sanskrit, a circle or an orb, also the 10 divisions of the Rig Veda. The most sacred names in India generally begin with this letter, from Mahat, the first manifested intellect, and Mandara, the great mountain used by the gods to churn the ocean, down to Mandakini, the heavenly Ganga, or Ganges, Manu, etc., etc. Will this be called a coincidence? A strange one is it then, indeed, when we see even Moses, found in the water of the Nile, with the symbolical consonant in his name. And Pharaoh's daughter called his name Moses, and she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Besides which, the Hebrew sacred name of God, applied to this letter M, is Mebrich, the holy or the blessed, and the name for the water of the flood is Mbul. A reminder of the three Marys at the crucifixion, and their connection with Mer, the sea, or water, may close these examples. This is why, in Judaism and Christianity, the Messiah is always connected with water, baptism, and also with the fishes, the sign of the zodiac called Minam in Sanskrit, and even with the Matsya, fish, Avatara, and the lotus, the symbol of the womb, or with the water lily, which has the same signification. In the relics of ancient Egypt, the greater the antiquity of the votive symbols and emblems of the objects exhumed, the oftener are lotus flowers and water found in connection with the solar gods. The god Khnum, the moist power, or water, as Thales taught, being the principle of all things, sits on a throne enshrined in a lotus. The god best stands on a lotus, ready to devour his progeny. Thought, the god of mystery and wisdom, the sacred scribe of Amenti, wearing the solar disk as headgear, sits with a bull's head, the sacred bull of Mendus, being a form of thought and a human body, on a full-blown lotus. Finally, it is the goddess Hecate, under her shape of a frog, who rests on the lotus, thus showing her connection with water. And it is from the unpoetical shape of this frog symbol, undeniably the glyph of the most ancient of the Egyptian deities, that the Egyptologists have been vainly trying to unravel the mystery and functions of the goddess. Its adoption in the church by the early Christians shows that they knew it better than our modern Orientalists. The frog or toad goddess was one of the chief cosmic deities connected with creation, on account of this animal's amphibious nature, and chiefly because of its apparent resurrection, after long ages of solitary life, enshrined in old walls, in rocks. She not only participated in the organization of the world, together with Khnum, but was also connected with the dogma of resurrection. There must have been some very profound and sacred meaning attached to this symbol, since, notwithstanding the risk of being charged with a disgusting form of zealotry, the early Egyptian Christians adopted it in their churches. A frog or toad, enshrined in a lotus flower, or simply without the latter emblem, was the form chosen for the church lamps, on which were engraved the words "I am the resurrection." These frog goddesses are also found on all the mummies. The moon, Deus Lunis, Phoebe. This archaic symbol is the most poetical of all symbols, as also the most philosophical. The ancient Greeks brought it into prominence, and the modern poets have worn it threadbare. The Queen of Night, riding in the majesty of her peerless light in heaven, throwing all, even Hesperus, into darkness, and spreading her silver mantle over the whole sidereal world, has ever been a favorite theme with all the poets of Christendom, from Milton and Shakespeare down to the latest versifier. But the refulgent lamp of night, with her suite of stars unnumbered, spoke only to the imagination of the profane. Until lately, religion and science had naught to do with the beautiful mythos. Yet, the cold chaste moon, she, who, in the words of Shelley, makes all beautiful on which she smiles, that wandering shrine of soft, yet icy flame which ever is transformed, yet still the same, and warms not, but illumes, stands in closer relations to earth than any other sidereal orb. The sun is the giver of life to the whole planetary system, the moon is the giver of life to our globe, and the early races understood and knew it, even in their infancy. She is the queen, and she is the king. She was King Soma before she became transformed into Phoebe and the chaste Diana. She is preeminently the deity of the Christians, through the Mosaic and Kabbalistic Jews, though the civilized world may have remained ignorant of the fact for long ages. In fact, ever since the last initiated father of the church died, carrying with him into his grave the secrets of the pagan temples. For such fathers as Origen or Clemens Alexandrinus, the moon was Jehovah's living symbol, the giver of life and the giver of death, the disposer of being in our world. For, if Artemis was Luna in heaven, and, with the Greeks, Diana on earth, who presided over childbirth and life, with the Egyptians, she was Hecate, in hell, the goddess of death, who ruled over magic and enchantments. More than this, as the personified moon, whose phenomena are triadic, Diana Hecate Luna is the three-in-one. For she is Diva Triformis, Tergemina, Triceps, 3 heads on one neck, like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Hence she is the prototype of our Trinity, which has not always been entirely male. The number 7, so prominent in the Bible, so sacred in the seventh day, or Sabbath, came to the Jews from antiquity, deriving its origin from the fourfold number 7, contained in the 28 days of the lunar month, each septenary portion thereof being typified by 1/4 of the moon. It is worth the trouble of presenting, in this work, a bird's-eye view of the origin and development of the lunar myth and worship in historical antiquity on our side of the globe. Its earlier origin is untraceable by exact science, which rejects all tradition, while for theology, which, under the guidance of the crafty popes, has put a brand on every fragment of literature that does not bear the imprimatur of the Church of Rome, its archaic history is a sealed book. Whether the Egyptian or the Aryan Hindu religious philosophy is the more ancient, the secret doctrine says it is the latter does not much matter in this instance, as the lunar and solar worship are the most ancient in the world. Both have survived and prevail to this day throughout the whole world, with some openly, with others as, for instance, in Christian symbology secretly. The cat, a lunar symbol, was sacred to Isis, who was the moon in one sense, just as Osiris was the sun, and is often seen on the top of the sistrum in the hand of the goddess. This animal was held in great veneration in the city of Bubastis, which went into deep mourning on the death of the sacred cats, because Isis, as the moon, was particularly worshipped in that city of mysteries. The astronomical symbolism connected with it has already been given in section 1, and no one has better described it than Mr. Gerald Massey in his lectures and in The Natural Genesis. The eye of the cat, it is said, seems to follow the lunar phases in their growth and decline, and its orbs shine like 2 stars in the darkness of night. Hence the mythological allegory which shows Diana hiding in the moon, under the shape of a cat, when she was seeking, in company with other deities, to escape the pursuit of Typhon, as related in the Metamorphoses of Ovid. The moon, in Egypt, was both the eye of horns and the eye of Osiris the sun. The same with the cynocephalus. The dog-headed ape was a glyph to symbolize the sun and moon, in turn, though the cynocephalus is really more hermetic than a religious symbol. For it is the hieroglyph of Mercury, the planet, and of the Mercury of the alchemical philosophers, who say that Mercury has to be ever near Isis, as her minister, for without Mercury, neither Isis nor Osiris can accomplish anything in the great work. The cynocephalus, whenever represented with the caduceus, the crescent, or the lotus, is a glyph of the philosophical Mercury, but when seen with a reed, or a roll of parchment, he stands for Hermes, the secretary and advisor of Isis, as Hanumana filled the same office with Rama. Though the regular sun worshippers, the Parsis, are few, yet not only is the bulk of the Hindu mythology and history based upon, and interblended with, these two worships, but so is even the Christian religion itself. From their origin down to our modern day, it has colored the theologies of both the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches. Indeed, the difference between the Aryan Hindu and the Aryan European faiths is very small, if only the fundamental ideas of both are taken into consideration. Hindus are proud of calling themselves Suryavanshas and Chandravanshas, of the solar and lunar dynasties. The Christians pretend to regard this as idolatry, and yet they adhere to a religion entirely based upon solar and lunar worship. It is vain and useless for the Protestants to exclaim against the Roman Catholics for their moriolatry, based on the ancient cult of lunar goddesses, when they themselves worship Jehovah, preeminently a lunar god, and when both churches have accepted in their theologies the Sun Christ and the lunar trinity. What is known of Chaldean moon worship, of the Babylonian god, Sin, called by the Greeks Deus Lunas, is very little, and that little is apt to mislead the profane student, who fails to grasp the esoteric significance of the symbols. As popularly known to the ancient profane philosophers and writers, for those who were initiated were pledged to silence the Chaldeans were the worshippers of the moon under her and his various names, just as were the Jews who came after them. In the unpublished MS. On the art speech, already mentioned, giving a key to the formation of the ancient symbolical language, a logical raison d'etre is brought forward for this double worship. It is written by a wonderfully well-informed and acute scholar and mystic, who gives it in the comprehensive form of a hypothesis. The latter, however, forcibly becomes a proven fact in the history of religious evolution in human thought, to anyone who has ever had a glimpse into the secret of ancient symbology. Thus, he says, one of the first occupations among men, connected with those of actual necessity, would be the perception of time periods, marked on the vaulted arch of the heavens, sprung and rising over the level floor of the horizon, or the plain of still water. These would come to be marked as those of day and night, of the phases of the moon, of its stellar or synodic revolutions, and of the period of the solar year with recurrence of the seasons, and with the application to such periods of the natural measure of day or night, or of the day divided into the light and the dark. It would also be discovered that there was a longest and shortest solar day, and 2 solar days of equal day and night, within the period of the solar year, and the points in the year of these could be marked with the greatest precision in the starry groups of the heavens or the constellations, subject to that retrograde movement thereof, which in time would require a correction by intercalation. As was the case in the description of the flood, where correction of 150 days was made for a period of 600 years, during which confusion of landmarks had increased. This would naturally come to pass with all races in all time, and such knowledge must be taken to have been inherent in the human race, prior to what we call the historic period as during the same. On this basis, the author seeks for some natural physical function, possessed in common by the human race, and connected with the periodical manifestations, such that the connection between the two kinds of phenomena became fixed in common or popular usage. He finds it in a. The feminine physiological phenomena at every lunar month of 28 days, or 4 weeks of 7 days each, so that 13 occurrences of the period should happen in 364 days, which is the solar week year of 52 weeks of 7 days each. B. The quickening of the fetus is marked by a period of 126 days, or 18 weeks of 7 days each. C. That period, which is called the period of viability, is one of 210 days, or 30 weeks of 7 days each. D. The period of parturition is accomplished in 280 days, or a period of 40 weeks of 7 days each, or 10 lunar months of 28 days each, or of 9 calendar months of 31 days each, counting on the royal arch of heavens, for the measure of the period of traverse from the darkness of the womb to the light and glory of conscious existence, that continuing inscrutable mystery and miracle. Thus the observed periods of time marking the workings of the birth function, would naturally become a basis of astronomical calculation. We may almost affirm that this was the mode of reckoning among all nations, either independently or intermediately and indirectly by tuition. It was the mode with the Hebrews, for even today they calculate the calendar by means of the 354 and 355 of the lunar year, and we possess a special evidence that it was the mode with the ancient Egyptians, as to which this is the proof. The basic idea underlying the religious philosophy of the Hebrews was that God contained all things within himself, and that man was his image, man including woman. The place of the man and woman with the Hebrews was among the Egyptians occupied by the bull and the cow, sacred to Osiris and Isis 626, who were represented, respectively, by a man having a bull's head and a woman having the head of a cow, which symbols were worshipped. Notoriously, Osiris was the sun and the river Nile, the tropical year of 365 days, which number is the value of the word Nalos, and the bull, as he was also the principle of fire and of life-giving force, while Isis was the moon, the bed of the river Nile, or the Mother Earth, for the parturient energies of which water was a necessity, the lunar year of 364 days, the time maker of the periods of gestation, and the cow marked by, or with, the crescent new moon. But the use of the cow of the Egyptians for the woman of the Hebrews was not intended as of any radical difference of signification, but a concurrence in the teaching, intended, and merely as the substitution of a symbol of common import, which was this, viz. The period of parturition with the cow and the woman was held to be the same, or 280 days, or 10 lunar months of 4 weeks each. And in this period consisted the essential value of this animal symbol, whose mark was that of the crescent moon. These parturient and natural periods are found to have been subjects of symbolism all over the world. They were thus used by the Hindus, and are found to be most plainly set forth by the ancient Americans, in the Richardson and Jess tablets, in the Palenque cross and elsewhere, and manifestly lay at the base of the formation of the calendar forms of the Mayas of Yucatan, the Hindus, the Assyrians, and the ancient Babylonians, as well as the Egyptians and Old Hebrews. The natural symbols would be either the phallus or the phallus and yoni, male and female. Indeed, the words translated by the generalizing terms male and female, in the 27th verse of the first chapter of Genesis, are sakra and kabba, or, literally, phallus and yoni. While the representation of the phallic emblems would barely indicate the genital members of the human body, when their functions and the development of the seed vesicles emanating from them were considered, there would come into indication a mode of measures of lunar time, and through lunar, of solar time. This is the physiological or anthropological key to the moon symbol. The key that opens the mystery of theogony, or the evolution of the manvantaric gods, is more complicated, and has nothing phallic in it. There, all is mystical and divine. But the Jews, beyond connecting Jehovah directly with the moon as a generative god, preferred to ignore the higher hierarchies, and have made their patriarchs of some of these zodiacal constellations and planetary gods, thus euhemerizing the purely theosophical idea, and dragging it down to the level of sinful humanity. The MS, from which the above is extracted, explains very clearly to what hierarchy of gods Jehovah belonged, and who this Jewish god was, for it shows, in clear language, that which the writer has always insisted upon, namely, that the God with which the Christians have burdened themselves was no better than the lunar symbol of the reproductive or generative faculty in nature. They have ever ignored even the Hebrew secret god of the Kabbalists, Ein Sof, a conception as grand as Para-Brahman in the earliest Kabbalistic and mystical ideas. But it is not the Kabbalah of Rosenroth that can ever give the true original teachings of Shimeon ben Yochai, which were as metaphysical and philosophical as any could be. And how many are there among the students of the Kabbalah who know anything of them, except in their distorted Latin translations? Let us glance at the idea which led the ancient Jews to adopt a substitute for the ever unknowable, and which has misled the Christians into mistaking the substitute for the reality. If to these organs phallus and yoni as symbols of creative cosmic agencies the idea of time periods can be attached, then, indeed, in the construction of temples as dwellings of deity, or of Jehovah, that part designated as the Holy of Holies, or the Most Holy Place, should borrow its title from the recognized sacredness of the generative organs, considered as symbols of measures as well as of creative cause. With the ancient wise, there was no name, and no idea, and no symbol, of a first cause. With the Hebrews, the indirect conception of such was couched in a term of negation of comprehension, viz. Ein Sof, or the without bounds. But the symbol of its first comprehensible manifestation was the conception of a circle with its diameter line, to at once carry a geometric, phallic, and astronomic idea, for the one takes its birth from the zero, or the circle, without which it could not be, and from the one, or primal one, spring the 9 digits, and, geometrically, all plane shapes. So in Kabbalah this circle, with its diameter line, is the picture of the 10 Sephiroth, or emanations, compassing the atom Kadmon, or the archetypal man, the creative origin of all things. This idea of connecting the picture of the circle and its diameter line, that is, the number 10, with the signification of the reproductive organs and the most holy place, was carried out constructively in the King's Chamber, or Holy of Holies, of the Great Pyramid, in the Tabernacle of Moses, and in the Holy of Holies of the Temple of Solomon. It is the picture of a double womb, for in Hebrew the letter He is at the same time the number 5, and the symbol of the womb, and twice 5 is 10, or the phallic number. This double womb also shows the duality of the idea carried from the highest or spiritual down to the lowest or terrestrial plane, and limited by the Jews to the latter. With them, therefore, the number 7 has acquired the most prominent place in their exoteric religion, a cult of external forms and empty rituals. Take, for instance, their Sabbath, the 7th day sacred to their deity, the moon, symbolical of the generative Jehovah. But, with other nations, the number 7 was typical of theogonic evolution, of cycles, cosmic planes, and the 7 forces and occult powers in cosmos, as a boundless whole, whose first upper triangle was unreachable to the finite intellect of man. While other nations, therefore, busied themselves in their forcible limitation of cosmos in space and time, only with its septenary manifested plane, the Jews centered this number solely in the moon, and based all their sacred calculations thereupon. Hence we find the thoughtful author of the MS. just quoted, remarking, in reference to the metrology of the Jews, that if 20,612 be multiplied by 4/3, the product will afford a base for the ascertainment of the mean revolution of the moon. And if this product be again multiplied by 4/3, this continued product will afford a base for finding the exact period of the mean solar year, this form becoming, for the finding of astronomical periods of time, of very great service. This double number, male and female, is symbolized also in some well-known idols, for instance, Ardhanarishvara, the Isis of the Hindus, Eridanus or Artan, or the Hebrew Jordan, or source of descent. She is standing on a lotus leaf floating on the water. But the signification is that it is androgyne or hermaphrodite, that is phallus and yoni combined, the number 10, the Hebrew letter Yod, the containment of Jehovah. She, or rather she-he, gives the minutes of the same circle of 360 degrees. Jehovah in its best aspect is Binah, the upper mediating mother, the great seer Holy Spirit, and therefore rather a synonym of Mary, the mother of Jesus, than of his father. That mother, being the Latin mare the sea, is here, also, Venus, the Stella del Mare, or star of the sea. The ancestors of the mysterious Akkadians, the Chandravanshas or Indavanshas, the lunar kings, whom tradition shows reigning at Prayaga, Allahabad, ages before our era, had come from India and brought with them the worship of their forefathers, of Soma and his son Buddha, which afterwards became that of the Chaldeans. Yet such adoration, apart from popular astrolatry and heliolatry, was in no sense idolatry. No more, at any rate, than the modern Roman Catholic symbolism which connects the Virgin Mary, the Magna Mater of the Syrians and Greeks, with the moon. Of this worship, the most pious Roman Catholics feel quite proud and loudly confess to it. In a memoir to the French Academy, the Marquis de Merville says, "It is only natural that, as an unconscious prophecy, Amun-Ra should be his mother's husband, since the Magna Mater of the Christians is precisely the spouse of that son she conceives." We Christians can understand now why Neith throws radiance on the sun, while remaining the moon, since the Virgin, who is the Queen of Heaven, as was Neith, clothes the Christ Son, as does Neith, and is clothed by him, tu vestis solum et te sol vested, as is sung by the Roman Catholics during their service. We Christians understand also how it is that the famous inscription at Say should have stated that none has ever lifted my veil peplum, considering that this sentence, literally translated, is the summary of what is sung in the church on the day of the Immaculate Conception. Surely nothing could be more sincere than this. It justifies entirely what Mr. Gerald Massey has said in his lecture on lunulatry, ancient and modern. The man in the moon, Osiris Sut, Jehovah Satan, Christ Judas, and other lunar twins, is often charged with bad conduct. In the lunar phenomena, the moon was one, as the moon, which was twofold in sex and threefold in character, as mother, child, and adult male. Thus the child of the moon became the consort of his own mother. It could not be helped if there was to be any reproduction. He was compelled to be his own father. These relationships were repudiated by later sociology, and the primitive man in the moon got tabooed. Yet in its latest, most inexplicable phase, this has become the central doctrine of the grossest superstition the world has seen. For these lunar phenomena and their humanly represented relationships, the incestuous included, are the very foundations of the Christian Trinity and unity. Through ignorance of the symbolism, the simple representation of early time has become the most profound religious mystery in modern lunulatry. The Roman Church, without being in any wise ashamed of the proof, portrays the Virgin Mary arrayed with the sun and the horned moon at her feet, holding the lunar infant in her arms as child and consort of the mother moon. The mother, child, and adult male are fundamental. In this way it can be proved that our Christology is mummified mythology and legendary lore, which have been palmed off upon us in the Old Testament and the New, as divine revelation uttered by the very voice of God. A charming allegory is found in the Zohar, one which unveils better than anything else ever did the true character of Jehovah in the primitive conception of the Hebrew Kabbalists. It is now found in the philosophy of Ibn Jebral's Kabbalah, translated by Isaac Meyer. In the introduction written by R. Hizkiah, which is very old and forms part of our Brody edition of the Zohar, is an account of a journey taken by R. Elazar, son of R. Shimon b Yahai, and R. Abba. They met a man bearing a heavy burden. They conversed together, and the explanations of the Torah by the man with the burden were so wonderful that they asked him for his name. He replied, "Do not ask me who I am, but we will all proceed with the explanation of the Torah law." They asked, "Who caused thee thus to walk and carry such a heavy load?" He answered, "The letter, Yod, which equals 10, and is the symbolical letter of Kether and the essence and germ of the holy name YHVH, made war. They said to him, "If thou wilt tell us the name of thy father, we will kiss the dust of thy feet." He replied, "As to my father, he had his dwelling in the great sea, and was a fish therein like Vishnu and Dagon, which first destroyed the great sea. And he was great and mighty and ancient of days, until he swallowed all the other fishes in the great sea." R. Elazar listened to his words and said to him, "Thou art the son of the holy flame, thou art the son of Rabham Nun Asaba, the old. The fish in Aramaic or Chaldi is Nun, noon. Thou art the son of the light of the Torah Dharma." Then the author explains that the feminine Sephira, Binah, is termed by the Kabbalists the Great Sea. Therefore Binah, whose divine names are Jehovah, Yah, and Elohim, is simply the Chaldean Tiamat, the female power, the Thalath of Beresis, who presides over the chaos, and was made out later by Christian theology to be the serpent and the devil. She, Yahava, is the supernal he, and Eve. This Yahava then, Jehovah, is identical with our chaos father, mother, son on the material plane, and in the purely physical world, deus and demon, at one and the same time, the sun and moon, good and evil, God and demon. Lunar magnetism generates life, preserves and destroys it, psychically as well as physically. And if, astronomically, the moon is one of the 7 planets of the ancient world, in theogony she is one of the regents thereof with Christians now as much as with pagans, the former referring to her under the name of one of their archangels, and the latter under that of one of their gods. Therefore the meaning of the fairy tale translated by Chwulson from the Arabic translation of an old Chaldean MS. Of Kutami being instructed by the idol of the moon, is easily understood. Seldenus tells us the secret, as well as Maimonides in his Guide to the Perplexed. The worshippers of the teraphim, or the Jewish oracles, carved images, and claimed that the light of the principal stars' planets permeating these through and through. The angelic virtues or the regents of the stars and planets conversed with them, teaching them many most useful things and arts. And Seldenus explains that the teraphim were built and compassed after the position of certain planets, those which the Greeks called, and according to figures that were located in the sky, and called, or the tutelary gods. Those who traced out the diviners by the. It is such sentences, however, in the Nabatean agriculture, which have frightened the men of science, and made them proclaim the work either an apocryphon, or a fairy tale, unworthy of the notice of an academician. At the same time, as shown, zealous Roman Catholics and Protestants metaphorically tore it to pieces. The former because it described the worship of demons, the latter because it was ungodly. Once more, all are wrong. It is not a fairy tale, and, as far as the pious churchmen are concerned, the same worship may be shown in their scriptures, however disfigured by translation. Solar and lunar worship and also the worship of the stars and elements can be traced and figure in Christian theology. These are defended by papists and can be stoutly denied by the Protestants only at their own risk and peril. Two instances may be given. Ammianus Marcellinus teaches that ancient divinations were always accomplished with the help of the spirits of the elements, spiritus elementarum, and in Greek, but it is found now that the planets, the elements, and the zodiac were figured not only at Heliopolis by the 12 stones called mysteries of the elements, elementarum arcana, but also in Solomon's temple and, as pointed out by various writers, in several old Italian churches, and even at Notre Dame de Paris, where they can be seen to this day. No symbol, even including the sun, was more complex in its manifold meanings than the lunar symbol. The sex was, of course, dual. With some it was male, as, for instance, the Hindu king Soma and the Chaldean Sin. With other nations it was female, the Boeotian goddesses Diana Luna, Ilithia, Lucina. With the Tauri, human victims were sacrificed to Artemis, a form of the lunar goddess. The Cretans called her Dictina, and the Medes and Persians Anatis, as shown by an inscription of Calo. This Artemis Lachia, the goddess that presided at conception and childbirth, is, in her functions and as the triple Hecate, the Orphic deity, the predecessor of the god of the rabbins and pre-Christian Kabbalists, and his lunar type. The goddess was the personified symbol of the various and successive aspects represented by the moon in each of her three phases, and this interpretation was already that of the Stoics, while the Orpheans explained the epithet by the three kingdoms of nature over which she reigned. Jealous, bloodthirsty, revengeful and exacting, Hecate Luna is a worthy counterpart of the jealous god of the Hebrew prophets. The whole riddle of the solar and lunar worship, as now traced in the churches, hangs indeed on this world-old mystery of lunar phenomena. The correlative forces in the Queen of Night that lie latent for modern science, but are fully active to the knowledge of Eastern adepts, explain well the 1001 images under which the moon was represented by the ancients. It also shows how much more profoundly learned in the Selenic mysteries were the ancients than are now our modern astronomers. The whole pantheon of the lunar gods and goddesses, Nephthys or Neith, Proserpina, Melita, Cybele, Isis, Astarte, Venus, and Hecate, on the one hand, and Apollo, Dionysus, Adonis, Bacchus, Osiris, Hades, Thamuz, on the other, all show on the face of their names and titles those of sons and husbands of their mothers, their identity with the Christian Trinity. In every religious system, the gods were made to merge their functions, as father, son, and husband, into one, and the goddesses were identified as wife, mother, and sister of the male god, the former synthesizing the human attributes as the son, the giver of life, the latter merging all the other titles in the grand synthesis known as Maya, Maria, a generic name. Maya, in its forced derivation, has come to mean with the Greeks, mother from the root ma, nurse, and even gave its name to the month of May, which was sacred to all these goddesses before it became consecrated to Mary. Its primitive meaning, however, was Maya, Durga, translated by the Orientalists as inaccessible, but meaning in truth the unreachable in the sense of illusion and unreality, as being the source and cause of spells, the personification of illusion. In religious rites, the moon served a dual purpose. Personified as a female goddess for exoteric purposes, or as a male god in allegory and symbol, in occult philosophy, our satellite was regarded as a sexless potency to be well studied, because it was to be dreaded. With the initiated Aryans, Chaldeans, Greeks and Romans, Soma, Sin, Artemis Cetera, the hermaphrodite Apollo, whose attribute is the lyre, and the bearded Diana of the bow and arrow, Deus Lunis, and especially Osiris Lunis and Thought Lunis, were the occult potencies of the moon. But whether male or female, whether Thought or Minerva, Soma or Astaroth, the moon is the occult mystery of mysteries, and more a symbol of evil than of good. Her 7 phases, in the original esoteric division, are divided into 3 astronomical phenomena and 4 purely psychic phases. That the moon was not always reverenced is shown in the mysteries, in which the death of the moon god, the 3 phases of gradual waning and final disappearance, was allegorized by the moon, standing for the genius of evil, that, for the time, triumphs over the light and life-giving God, the sun, and all the skill and learning of the ancient hierophants in magic were required to turn this triumph into a defeat. It was the most ancient worship of all, that of the 3rd race of our round, the hermaphrodites, in which the male moon became sacred when, after the so-called fall, the sexes had become separated. Deus Lunis then became an androgyne, male and female in turn, to finally serve, for purposes of sorcery, as a dual power for the 4th root race, the Atlanteans. With the 5th, our own race, the lunar solar worship, divided the nations into 2 distinct antagonistic camps. It led to events described eons later in the Mahabharatan War, which to the Europeans is the fabulous, to the Hindus and occultists the historical, strife between the Suryavanshas and the Indavanshas. Originating in the dual aspect of the moon, the worship of the female and the male principles respectively, it ended in distinct solar and lunar cults. Among the Semitic races, the sun was for a very long time feminine and the moon masculine, the latter notion being adopted by them from the Atlantean traditions. The moon was called the lord of the sun Bel Shemesh, before the Shemesh worship. The ignorance of the incipient reasons for such a distinction, and of occult principles, led the nations into anthropomorphic idol worship. During that period which is absent from the Mosaic books, viz. From the exile from Eden to the allegorical flood, the Jews, with the rest of the Semites, worshipped Dionysi, the ruler of men, the judge or the sun. Though the Jewish canon and Christianism have made the sun to become the Lord God and Jehovah in the Bible, yet the same Bible is full of indiscreet traces of the androgyne deity, which was Jehovah, the sun, and Astaroth, the moon in its female aspect, and quite free from the present metaphorical element given to it. God is a consuming fire, a person, and is encompassed by fire. It was not only in vision that Ezekiel saw the Jews worshipping the sun. The Baal of the Israelites, the Shemesh of the Moabites, and the Moloch of the Ammonites was the identical sun Jehovah, and he is till now the king of the host of heaven, the sun, as much as Astaroth was the queen of heaven or the moon. The Sun of Righteousness has only now become a metaphorical expression. But the religion of every ancient nation had been primarily based upon the occult manifestations of a purely abstract force or principle now called God. The very establishment of such worship shows, in its details and rites, that the philosophers who evolved such systems of nature, subjective and objective, possessed profound knowledge and were acquainted with many facts of a scientific nature. For besides being purely occult, the rites of lunar worship were based, as just shown, upon a knowledge of physiology, quite a modern science with us psychology, sacred mathematics, geometry and metrology, in their right applications to symbols and figures, which are but glyphs recording observed natural and scientific facts, in short upon a most minute and profound knowledge of nature. As we have just said, lunar magnetism generates life, preserves and destroys it, and Soma embodies the triple power of the Trimurti, though it remains unrecognized by the profane to this day. The allegory that makes Soma, the moon, produced by the churning of the ocean of life, space, by the gods in another Manvantara, that is, in the pre-genetic day of our planetary system, and the myth, which represents the rishis milking the earth, whose calf was Soma, the moon, have a deep cosmographical meaning, for it is neither our earth which is milked, nor was the moon which we know the calf. Had our wise men of science known as much of the mysteries of nature as the ancient Aryans did, they would surely never have imagined that the moon was projected from the earth. Once more, the oldest of permutations in theogony, the son becoming his own father and the mother generated by the son, has to be remembered and taken into consideration if the symbolical language of the ancients is to be understood by us. Otherwise, mythology will be ever haunting the Orientalists as simply the disease which springs up at a peculiar stage of human culture. As Renouf gravely observes, the ancients taught the auto-generation, so to speak, of the gods. The one divine essence, unmanifested, perpetually begetting a second self, manifested, which second self, androgynous in its nature, gives birth, in an immaculate way, to everything macrocosmical and microcosmical in this universe. This was shown in the circle in the diameter, or the sacred 10, a few pages back. But our Orientalists, notwithstanding their extreme desire to discover one homogeneous element in nature, will not see it. Cramped in their researches by such ignorance, the Aryanists and Egyptologists are constantly led astray from truth in their speculations. Thus, Darouge is unable to understand, in the text which he translates, the meaning of Amun-Ra saying to King Amenhotep, who is supposed to be Memnon, "Thou art my son, I have begotten thee." And, finding the same idea in many a text and under various forms, this very Christian Orientalist is finally compelled to exclaim, "For this idea to have entered the mind of a hierogrammatist, there must have been in their religion a more or less defined doctrine, indicating as a possible fact that might come to pass, a divine and immaculate incarnation under a human form." Precisely. But why throw the explanation onto an impossible prophecy, when the whole secret is explained by the later religion copying the earlier? This doctrine was universal, nor was it the mind of any one hierogrammatist that evolved it, for the Indian avatars are a proof to the contrary. After which, having come to realize more clearly what the Divine Father and Son were with the Egyptians, Darouge still fails to account for, and to perceive what were the functions attributed to the feminine principle in that primordial generation. He does not find it in the goddess Neith of Se. Yet he quotes the sentence of the commander to Cambyses when introducing that king into the Saitic temple. "I made known to His Majesty the dignity of Se, which is the abode of Neith, the great female producer, Genitrix of the Son, who is the firstborn, and who is not begotten, but only brought forth, and hence is the fruit of an immaculate mother. How much more grandiose, philosophical and poetical for whoever is able to understand and appreciate it is the real distinction made between the Immaculate Virgin of the ancient pagans and the modern papal conception. With the former, the ever-youthful Mother Nature, the antitype of her prototypes, the sun and moon, generates and brings forth her mind-born son, the universe. The sun and moon, as male-female deities, fructify the earth, the microcosmical mother, and the latter conceives and brings forth, in her turn. With the Christians, the firstborn, primogenitus, is indeed generated, i.e., begotten, genitus, non-factus, and positively conceived and brought forth. Virgo Periot explains the Latin Church. Thus does the Church drag down the noble spiritual ideal of the Virgin Mary to the earth, and, making her of the earth earthy, degrades the ideal she portrays to the lowest of the anthropomorphic goddesses of the rabble. Truly, Neith, Isis, Diana, etc., by whatever name she was called, was a demiurgical goddess, at once visible and invisible, having her place in heaven, and helping on the generation of species, the moon, in short. Her occult aspects and powers are numberless, and, in one of them, the moon becomes with the Egyptians Hathor, another aspect of Isis, and both of these goddesses are shown suckling Horus. Behold in the Egyptian Hall of the British Museum, Hathor worshipped by Pharaoh Thotmes, who stands between her and the Lord of Heavens. The monolith was taken from Karnak. The same goddess has the following legend inscribed on her throne. The Divine Mother and Lady, or Queen of Heaven, also the morning star and the light of the sea, Stella Matutina and Lux Maris. All the lunar goddesses had a dual aspect, one divine, the other infernal. All were the virgin mothers of an immaculately born son, the sun. Raoul Richet shows the moon goddess of the Athenians, Pallas, or Cybele, Minerva, or again Diana, holding her child son on her lap, invoked in her festivals as the one mother of God sitting on a lion, and surrounded by 12 personages, in whom the occultist recognizes the 12 great gods, and the pious Christian Orientalist the apostles, or rather the Grecian pagan prophecy thereof. They are both right, for the Immaculate Goddess of the Latin Church is a faithful copy of the older pagan goddesses. The number of the apostles is that of the 12 tribes, and the latter are a personification of the 12 great gods, and of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Almost every detail in the Christian dogma is borrowed from the heathens. Semele, the wife of Jupiter and mother of Bacchus, the sun, is, according to Nonnus, also carried or made to ascend to heaven after her death, where she presides between Mars and Venus, under the name of the Queen of the World, or the Universet, the name of which, as at the names of Hathor, Hecate, and other infernal goddesses, all the demons tremble. Whether so, or vice versa, is of no importance. That which is interesting to note is the perfect identity between the archaic copy and the modern original. Did space permit, we might show the inconceivable coolness and unconcern exhibited by certain followers of the Roman Catholic Church when they are made to face the revelations of the past. Tamori's remark that the Virgin took possession of all the sanctuaries of Ceres and Venus, and that the pagan rites, proclaimed and practiced in honor of those goddesses, were in a great measure transferred to the Mother of Christ, the advocate of romancers, that such is the fact, and that it is just as it should be, and quite natural. As the dogma, the liturgy, and the rites professed by the Roman Apostolical Church in 1862 are found engraved on monuments, inscribed on papyri, and cylinders hardly posterior to the deluge. It does seem impossible to deny the existence of a first anti-historical Roman Catholicism, of which our own is but the faithful continuation. But while the former was the culmination, the summum of the impudence of demons and Gothic necromancy, the latter is divine. If in our Christian revelation l'Apocalypse, Mary, clothed with the sun and having the moon under her feet, has no longer anything in common with the humble servant servante of Nazareth sick, it is because she has now become the greatest of theological and cosmological powers in our universe. Verily so, since Pindar thus sings of her assumption. She sits at the right hand of her father Jupiter, and is more powerful than all the other angels or gods, a hymn likewise applied to the Virgin. Saint Bernard also, quoted by Cornelius a Lapide, is made to address the Virgin Mary in this wise. The Son Christ lives in thee and thou livest in him. Again, the Virgin is admitted to be the moon by the same unsophisticated holy man. Being the Lucina of the Church, in childbirth the verse of Virgil, casta fove Lucina, tuus jam renat Apollo, is applied to her. Like the moon, the Virgin is the Queen of Heaven, adds the innocent saint. This settles the question. According to such writers as de Merville, the more similarity there exists between the pagan conceptions and the Christian dogmas, the more divine appears the Christian religion, and the more is it seen to be the only truly inspired one, especially in its Roman Catholic form. The unbelieving scientists and academicians who think they see in the Latin Church quite the opposite of divine inspiration, and who will not believe in the satanic tricks of plagiarism by anticipation, are severely taken to task. But then they believe in nothing and reject even the Nabatean agriculture as a romance, and a pack of superstitious nonsense, complains the memorialist. In their perverted opinion, Cuttami's idol of the moon and the statue of the Madonna are one. A noble marquis, 25 years ago, wrote 6 huge volumes, or, as he calls them, memoirs to the French Academy, with the sole object of proving Roman Catholicism to be an inspired and revealed faith. As a proof thereof, he furnishes numberless facts, all tending to show that the entire ancient world, ever since the deluge, had, with the help of the devil, been systematically plagiarizing the rites, ceremonies, and dogmas of the future Holy Church, which was to be born ages later. What would that faithful son of Rome have said had he heard his co-religionist, M. Renouf, the distinguished Egyptologist of the British Museum, declaring in one of his learned lectures that neither Hebrews nor Greeks borrowed any of their ideas from Egypt? But perhaps M. Renouf intended to say that it was the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Aryans who borrowed their ideas from the Latin Church. And if so, why, in the name of logic, do the papists reject the additional information which the occultists may give them on moon worship? Since it all tends to show that the worship of the Roman Catholic Church is as old as the world of Sabianism and astrolatry? The reason of early Christian and later Roman Catholic astrolatry, or the symbolical worship of sun and moon, a worship identical with that of the Gnostics, though less philosophical and pure than the sun worship of the Zoroastrians, is a natural consequence of its birth and origin. The adoption by the Latin Church of such symbols as water, fire, sun, moon and stars, and many others, is simply a continuation by the early Christians of the old worship of pagan nations. Thus, Aten got his wisdom, power, and knowledge by sitting at the feet of Mimir, the thrice-wise Jotun, who passed his life by the fountain of primeval wisdom, the crystalline waters of which increased his knowledge daily. Mimir drew the highest knowledge from the fountain, because the world was born of water, hence primeval wisdom was to be found in that mysterious element. The eye which Aten had to pledge to acquire that knowledge may be the sun, which enlightens and penetrates all things, his other eye being the moon, whose reflection gazes out of the deep, and which at last, when setting, sinks into the ocean. But it is something more than this. Loki, the fire god, is said to have hidden in the water, as well as in the moon, the light giver, whose reflection he found therein. This belief that the fire finds refuge in the water was not limited to the old Scandinavians. It was shared by all nations and was finally adopted by the early Christians, who symbolized the Holy Ghost under the shape of fire, cloven tongues like as of fire, the breath of the Father Son. This fire descends also into the water, or the sea mare, Mary. The dove was the symbol of the soul with several nations. It was sacred to Venus, the goddess born from the sea foam, and it became later the symbol of the Christian Anima Mundi, or Holy Spirit. One of the most occult chapters in the Book of the Dead is that entitled, The Transformation into the God-Giving Light to the Path of Darkness, wherein woman light of the shadow serves Thoth in his retreat in the moon. Thoth Hermes is said to hide therein, because he is the representative of the secret wisdom. He is the manifested logos of its light side, the concealed deity or dark wisdom when he is supposed to retire to the opposite hemisphere. Speaking of her power, the moon calls herself repeatedly the light which shineth in darkness, the woman light. Hence it became the accepted symbol of all the Virgin Mother goddesses. As the wicked evil spirits warred against a moon in days of yore, so they are supposed to war now, without, however, being able to prevail against the actual Queen of Heaven, Mary, the moon. Hence, also, the moon was intimately connected in all the pagan theogonies with the dragon, her eternal enemy. The Virgin, or Madonna, stands on the mythical Satan thus symbolized, who lies crushed and powerless under her feet. This, because the head and tail of the dragon, which, to this day in Eastern astronomy, represent the ascending and descending nodes of the moon, were also symbolized in ancient Greece by the two serpents. Hercules kills them on the day of his birth, and so does the babe in his Virgin Mother's arms. As Mr. Gerald Massey aptly observes in this connection, all such symbols figured their own facts from the first, and did not prefigure others of a totally different order. The iconography and dogmas, too, had survived in Rome from a period remotely pre-Christian. There was neither forgery nor interpolation of types, nothing but a continuity of imagery with a perversion of its meaning. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.